Have you ever noticed how deep thinking can lead to feelings of isolation? It's as if the more you comprehend, the less those around you are eager to share your thoughts. This feeling is not unique. Throughout history, society has been wary of those with out-of-the-box thinking, and it's not because they are wrong, but because of their ability to see what others choose to overlook. History is full of examples, from Socrates to Nietzsche, Galileo to Tesla. These extraordinary minds faced ridicule, silence, or complete disregard. The reason was not because of their intellectual failure, but because of the discomfort they caused others. Arthur Schopenhauer, known for his uncompromising honesty and philosophy, even argued that intelligence itself was a burden, condemning to loneliness those with too clear a vision of the world. But why does this happen? Why does society resist those who think differently? The answer lies in the depths of human psychology. Think about it. Being around a person with outstanding physical strength does not make you feel vulnerable, but rather admired. Meeting a wealthy person may cause envy, but not necessarily a sense of personal threat. But what happens when someone demonstrates intellectual superiority? Why does it cause such a negative reaction? You'll find out the answer to that question by watching this video to the end. Meeting a person whose intelligence is far superior to one's own often produces a very peculiar reaction. Psychologists have dubbed this phenomenon the mirror effect. The intellectual, like a mirror, reflects not only innovative ideas but also emphasizes the intellectual boundaries of others, which rarely causes delight. The mere presence of a deep thinker can involuntarily awaken a sense of inferiority in others, even if he or she does not utter a word. A legitimate question arises: why exactly does intelligence, more so than other forms of superiority, cause such discomfort? To make sense of this, it is necessary to understand how the human mind perceives various manifestations of superiority. Physical strength, for example, may be associated with leadership or defense. Wealth evokes admiration for success and stimulates the desire for similar achievements. These qualities, strength, wealth, beauty, are external in nature. We recognize them, but they do not touch the underlying self-image. Intelligence, on the other hand, operates differently. Unlike physical strength or material wealth, intelligence is inextricably linked to self-identity. Human identity is shaped by thoughts, beliefs, and personal perceptions of reality. Encountering an individual with an unconventional mindset who questions conventional truths is often perceived as a challenge to established assumptions, and even as an attack on one's self-worth. Instead of recognizing the superiority of intellect, individuals subconsciously resist, not because of the arrogance of the deep thinker, but because of the discomfort that comes from realizing one's own limitations. History shows that outstanding minds have often found themselves in isolation because their ideas not only contradicted established views, but also affected the ego of others who, in an effort to avoid mental confusion, are willing to defend their positions by any means necessary. It is suggested to think about personal experience. Surely everyone has faced a situation when an attempt to share a complex or profound thought in a casual conversation was met with misunderstanding or awkward silence. Have you noticed how people avoid in-depth discussions, preferring superficial conversations? This behavior is a defensive reaction to maintain psychological comfort and avoid confronting one's own intellectual boundaries. It is not a matter of chance, but a manifestation of psychological defense. When encountering a person of deep thinking, the average person instinctively switches on the self-preservation mode of his mind. Instead of giving in to natural curiosity, he resists. Instead of actively engaging in dialogue, he chooses the path of denial. This is why outstanding intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries often find themselves in a kind of isolation, not because of a personal desire for privacy, but because of social rejection. Notably, research shows that self-confidence is often valued far more highly than intelligence. In the virtual space of social networks, people tend to gravitate towards those who exude confidence, even if their ideas are not particularly profound. For this reason, charismatic but superficial thinkers have a greater impact on the masses than deep thinkers whose statements are full of nuances and undertones. Human history knows many examples of popular leaders, inspirational speakers, and viral influencers who thrive on telling people what they want to hear instead of stimulating their critical thinking. At the same time, those who dare to question commonly held beliefs often face enormous challenges in finding a wide audience willing to listen. Herein lies the amazing paradox inherent in intelligence. The more persistently one strives to realize the truth, the more one is alienated from the views of the mainstream. This mirroring effect not only demonstrates the limitations of society, but also highlights the underlying reasons why society as a whole resists change. This raises a legitimate question. If intelligence is such a serious threat, is there scientific evidence to support that people are actually afraid of it? Modern advances in the field of neurobiology provide compelling arguments in favor of this assertion. Numerous studies show that in situations where people feel intellectually inferior, their brains activate the amygdala, the area responsible for detecting potential threats and generating feelings of fear. Simply put, deep thinking doesn't just cause discomfort, it triggers a primal survival response similar to what we experience when faced with real danger. But why does intelligence activate the same fear circuits as physical threat? The answer to this question lies in the evolutionary peculiarities of the human brain. For most of human history, survival depended not so much on intelligence as on the ability to be accepted into a group and conform to its norms. In ancient times, when our ancestors lived in tribes, social cohesion was the key to survival. Expulsion from the tribe was tantamount to a death sentence because loneliness made a person defenseless against danger. This is why the human brain evolved to seek social approval rather than intellectual superiority. When a person of outstanding intellect appears in society, he unwittingly disrupts the established order. His unconventional ideas, new ways of looking at things, may go against accepted norms and established traditions. This causes a protective reaction in the brains of others who subconsciously perceive him as a potential threat rather than as a source of wisdom. This is why many prominent thinkers feel alone and misunderstood. This is not because of their inability to communicate, but because their intelligence sets them apart from those who value conformity above all else. A study conducted at Stanford University in 2021 showed that the perception of intellectuals depends on the situation. In personal communication, people feel less threatened by an intelligent person, but in a group, this reaction is amplified many times. In collectives, social status becomes paramount, having a significant impact on interpersonal relations. The reaction of individuals is directed not only to the manifestation of intelligence, but also to the perception of others of their position relative to other members of the group. When a person feels his social status threatened by a more erudite individual, there is an instinctive desire to belittle or isolate him in order to preserve his own position in the hierarchy. This phenomenon explains why prominent thinkers often find satisfaction in confidential conversations in private settings, but have difficulty interacting in large social groups. Psychologists have identified a number of cognitive distortions that shed light on the reasons for social rejection of intelligence. In particular, the Dunning-Kruger effect demonstrates that people with limited ability tend to overestimate their intelligence, while highly intelligent individuals, in contrast, tend to self-criticize and doubt their own knowledge. This discrepancy creates tensions in communication, as less competent individuals, convinced that they are right, reject the ideas and arguments of more profound thinkers. In addition, status quo bias plays an important role as the human brain favors familiar and established concepts over new and complex truths. This conservative desire for stability prevents the acceptance of innovative ideas coming from intellectuals, which can cause resistance and rejection in society. A high level of intelligence is often a source of restless thoughts that make people uncomfortable. A phenomenon known as the backfire effect is that encountering information that contradicts established beliefs does not lead to a revision of views, but only strengthens them. Deep thinkers presenting complex concepts often experience this rejection response. In the digital age, social media has multiplied this tendency to reject intelligence. The algorithms that control the dissemination of information prioritize audience engagement over content depth. This means that content that provokes controversy and emotional response spreads much faster than balanced and reasoned discourse. Just look at the most viral content. Simple, easy to remember, and often misleading snippets of information overshadow meaningful discussions. The paradox is that the higher a person's intellectual level, the more difficult it is for them to fit deep ideas into short, virally appealing formats. As a result, society is increasingly inclined towards entertainment rather than enlightenment, making it more difficult for deep thinkers to gain widespread recognition. So, what does this mean for people who tend to be deep thinkers? Intellectual aversion is a phenomenon that permeates not only the social fabric, but is rooted in human biology, psychology, and culture. It is an integral part of human nature, sustained by the dynamics of group behavior and amplified many times over by modern technology. This is not at all a call for intellectuals to stop sharing their thoughts, but an urgent need to recognize the powerful forces that oppose them. But if society is resisting the intellectual, what does it actually welcome? The answer lies in the pursuit of comfort, in creating a world where predictability is valued over truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most ruthlessly honest philosophers in history, held the view that intelligence is not a blessing, but rather a curse. Unlike many thinkers who saw intelligence as the key to success, Schopenhauer argued that the higher a person's intelligence, the more difficult it would be for them to find common ground with society. But why? What is it that makes intelligence such a heavy burden? Schopenhauer's philosophical views were based on a concept he called the will, a blind and irrational force that governs all human behavior. According to this thinker, the life path of most people is predetermined by their desire for survival, pleasure, and comfort. In other words, they are subject to the so-called will to live. However, people of outstanding intelligence choose a different path. Instead of blindly following their instincts, they cultivate a will to truth, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge of reality, even if this knowledge involves discomfort and heartache. While Philistines seek pleasure and avoid difficult questions, deep thinkers seek truth despite possible suffering and loneliness. This creates a deep divide between intellectuals and the rest of society. Whereas for most people, the meaning of life lies in interpersonal relationships, entertainment, and simple pleasures. Deep thinkers are often frustrated by these things, seeing them as mere distractions from more important existential questions. Schopenhauer believed that the deeper one understands the nature of human existence, the more difficult it is for him to find common ground with those around him. He begins to see the lies and hypocrisy hidden behind the facade of everyday life. Most social interactions are reduced to superficial conversations, games of hierarchy, and polite lies. Deep thinkers who value truth above all else often find it difficult to participate in this farce. The pursuit of deep learning collides with the public preference for simplicity. While Philistines are content with superficial conversations, intellectuals crave meaningful discussions, which creates barriers for them in their daily interactions, generating feelings of boredom and isolation. They realize the illusory nature of many human aspirations. Arthur Schopenhauer, a German philosopher, viewed desires and ambitions as mirages that most people vainly chase in their pursuit of wealth, power, and personal relationships. However, deep thinkers question the very value of these aspirations, which often gives the impression of their detachment and indifference to conventional values. This is why intellectuals often experience feelings of misunderstanding, alienation, and even resentment. Their very presence forces others to face unpleasant truths about themselves that most people try to avoid. Schopenhauer likened high intelligence to a heightened sense of awareness, a gift that is more like a curse. In his view, a high degree of intelligence tends to make a person unsociable because the depth of their thought process does not resonate with the surface world. The logic of his reflections was characterized by directness. The wider the horizons of knowledge, the more difficult it is to close one's eyes to what is happening. The sharper the awareness of the imperfection of the world, the more difficult it is to find joy in it. The deeper the immersion in thoughts, the stronger the feeling of detachment from others. Arthur Schopenhauer was of the opinion that there is an inverse relationship between the level of intelligence and the ability to be happy. In his opinion, not wisdom, but ignorance is the true key to a serene existence. This is why prominent thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Blaise Pascal, and Franz Kafka often faced depression, existential crisis, and alienation from society. However, Schopenhauer not only identified the problem, but also suggested solutions. He believed that although intelligence can lead to loneliness, there are ways for deep thinkers to cope with isolation. First of all, loneliness must be embraced. Schopenhauer did not see it as a punishment, but rather as a unique opportunity. He believed that people who are inclined to think deeply should use their alone time to develop intellectually and creatively, rather than spending it seeking social approval. Second, it is important to find like-minded people. Instead of fruitless attempts to dissolve into the masses, Arthur Schopenhauer urged outstanding minds to seek soulmates, whether in the pages of books, in philosophical treatises, or in selected intellectual communities. The philosopher urged wise interaction with the world around us. warning against the reckless disclosure of profound insights to those who are not ready to receive them. He advised thinkers to observe society closely, analyze its mechanisms, and weigh every word carefully. Schopenhauer's admonitions serve as a compass for modern intellectuals facing rejection from society. Intellect, despite its attendant loneliness, offers freedom, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of being. Schopenhauer saw the intellect as a two-edged stick, a source of both power and suffering. It allows one to see reality in its unconcealed form, but at the same time alienates those who prefer to live in a world of illusion. In the end, Schopenhauer's philosophy confirms what many already suspect. It is not the intellect itself that society fears, but the truth it exposes. It is often the case that outstanding minds face rejection, not because of the fallacy of their judgment, but because of their insights ahead of their time. If there is ever a sense of loneliness in one's reflections, it is important to realize that this is not a sign of failure, but rather evidence of the ability to see the world in its true light. However, the question arises, are deep thinkers doomed to isolation? Or are there ways to interact harmoniously with society without losing their intellectual depth? It must be recognized that social structures are inherently oriented toward maintaining stability rather than embracing innovative ideas. Most people prefer coziness and predictability to the search for truth. This is why superficial conversations, simplistic concepts, and monotonous content dominate public discourse. But why is comfort being prioritized over intellectual development? Why does society resist change, even if it promises progress? The answer lies in the peculiarities of human psychology and how social institutions shape our thinking from an early age. The human brain by nature seeks certainty and predictability. Inherent in human nature itself is the tendency to avoid intellectual effort, which has been termed cognitive ease in psychology. This means that the human mind favors information that is easily perceived and already familiar, as its processing requires minimal mental energy. The brain perceives complex, ambiguous, or new ideas as difficult and potentially dangerous. This phenomenon is reflected in the justification theory of the system, which explains why people tend to defend the existing order of things, even if it is not in their best interests. Rather than question authority or established beliefs, most people prefer to find rational explanations for them because change seems too unpredictable. The desire for conformity is also manifested in the phenomenon of groupthink, where people prefer to agree with commonly held views rather than risk social rejection by challenging them. This is why the majority often rejects intellectual dissent, even if it is based on truth. This deep-seated psychological preference for comfort over complexity explains why intellectuals, philosophers, and scientists often find it difficult to gain widespread acceptance, especially in their lifetime. Their ideas, which require critical reflection and revision of established views, are often resisted by those who prefer to remain in their cognitive comfort zone. In today's digital environment, where information spreads at an incredible speed, it is not those with deep knowledge and analytical skills who most often attract the attention of the public on social media, but those who are able to simplify complex concepts into memorable and easily disseminated fragments. Extensive discussions that require thoughtfulness and time for reflection are hard to find an audience, while viral content, on the contrary, instantly captures attention by appealing to emotions and offering a simplified perception of the world. Social media algorithms encourage user engagement, and nothing encourages this more than provocative arguments, outrage, or humorous sketches, which often push rational and meaningful discussions to the periphery of public attention. As a result, so-called echo chambers are formed where people are confronted predominantly with information that confirms their own beliefs, making them immune to alternative viewpoints and new perspectives. In this environment, deep thinkers who dare to challenge conventional wisdom and propose unconventional solutions are often outcast, ignored, misunderstood, or even attacked. This disregard for deep thinking is not only evident in virtual spaces, but also in educational institutions and corporate environments, the institutions that are supposed to shape our minds and develop our intellectual potential. In education, institutions often claim to prioritize intellectual development, but in reality, greater rewards go to those who are obedient than to those who demonstrate independence of thought. Students who successfully assimilate and reproduce information achieve greater success, while those who dare to question accepted norms or authority are often labeled troublemakers. In the corporate world, a similar trend can be observed. The most talented or innovative employees are not favored. but rather those who fit into the corporate culture and support the existing hierarchy of authority. In the political sphere, leaders who dare to make bold and unpopular statements based on logical reasoning often lose ground to those who simply satisfy the expectations of the masses by telling them what they want to hear. This paradox explains why many prominent intellectuals in history have faced rejection and alienation in their lifetime. Their ideas were perceived as destructive rather than as valuable contributions to social development. Society proclaims the value of intelligence, innovation, and critical thinking, but only truly recognizes and praises these qualities when they become safe and widely accepted. Human history is full of paradoxical examples of geniuses not being recognized in their lifetime, only to be honored by their descendants. Galileo Galilei, whose discoveries in astronomy turned the scientific world upside down, was persecuted and imprisoned, but today his name carries the title of one of the greatest scientists in history. Vincent van Gogh, whose paintings were full of expression and innovation, died in poverty and obscurity, and now his works sell for fabulous sums at prestigious auctions. Nikola Tesla, the brilliant engineer and inventor who revolutionized electrical engineering, spent his days in relative obscurity and died in poverty. Society is often wary of those who dare to challenge established norms and traditions. Intelligence and innovation are perceived as a threat, and only after a while, when the ideas of geniuses are no longer dangerous to the existing order, they begin to be praised. So what should those who are out-of-the-box thinkers and face misunderstanding from others do? If you have ever felt alone in your deep thinking, know that you are not alone. Throughout history, many extraordinary minds have not been appreciated in their lifetime, being ridiculed, persecuted, and ignored. Their ideas seemed too radical, destructive, or simply incomprehensible to the society of the time. All of these thinkers had one thing in common: they were ahead of their time. That is why they suffered for their wisdom and insight. Socrates, the founder of Western philosophy, devoted his life to critically analyzing commonly held beliefs and values. This prominent thinker urged everyone to question conventional truths, carefully analyze their own beliefs, and be guided by logic rather than blindly following established traditions. However, instead of receiving the recognition he deserved for his wisdom, he was tried on charges of child molestation and blasphemy. His true crime was to encourage people to think for themselves and seek truth independently. Despite the opportunity given to him to avoid execution, Socrates showed unwavering loyalty to his principles and preferred to accept the cup of poison rather than abandon his beliefs. His immortal words, spoken in the face of death, "The unexamined life is not worth living," have come to symbolize intellectual honesty and the pursuit of knowledge. His tragic death served as a warning. Society is often fearful of those who dare to challenge its fundamental beliefs. Another example is Galileo, whose only crime was the discovery of truth. His scientific proof of the heliocentric world system, asserting that the Earth revolves around the sun, shattered centuries of religious dogma. The Church, which wielded enormous power and controlled the spread of knowledge, branded him a heretic. Under threat of brutal torture, he was forced to publicly renounce his scientific discoveries. Although today we recognize him as one of the greatest scientists in human history, he was under house arrest during his lifetime, and his writings were banned for nearly a century. This fact shows how difficult it can be for society to accept new knowledge, especially when it contradicts established beliefs. Galileo Galilei's life and scientific work provide compelling evidence that even the most fundamental and validated truths can be rejected if they conflict with established power structures and social norms. The writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, which were once perceived as overly radical and deeply disturbing, suffered a similar fate. The philosopher boldly argued that traditional moral foundations were far from flawless, that society was fundamentally based on comforting lies, and that true strength lay in the ability of human beings to create their own values and ideals. In an era dominated by conservative views, these ideas proved too complex and contradictory for most to grasp. Nietzsche was branded as a madman, and his works were either ignored or misinterpreted. However, despite initial rejection, today Nietzsche's philosophy has a significant influence on fields such as psychology, literature, and existentialism. His groundbreaking ideas on power, will, and morality are currently shaping modern philosophical thought, providing clear evidence that society often rejects profound thinkers in the present, only to recognize their genius in the future. Nikola Tesla is also an example of a visionary mind. He nurtured bold dreams of providing the world with free energy, wireless transmission of electricity, and technological advances that could revolutionize human civilization. But society, and especially those with power and influence, saw his innovative ideas as a serious threat to their interests and the established order of things. Capitalists such as Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan were profiting from the sale of electricity, so Nikola Tesla's revolutionary idea of free energy was deliberately buried. Despite his genius, Tesla died alone in a modest hotel room, consigned to oblivion and destitute, while others made vast fortunes using his pioneering work. His fate is a vivid illustration of how society often favors businessmen and marketers over true visionaries. Alan Turing's contributions to cryptography played a crucial role in ending World War II. His talent for cracking codes saved countless lives. His theoretical developments in computing laid the foundation for modern artificial intelligence. However, instead of the recognition he deserved, he faced persecution because of his personal life. In 1952, he was chemically castrated for his homosexuality, leading to his tragic suicide at the age of just 41. These days, Turing is revered as a hero, but in his time, society rejected him despite his invaluable contributions to science and progress. In the annals of history, where intellectual superiority is more often associated with men, shines the bright star of Hypatia of Alexandria, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer who boldly stepped into male-dominated territory in the intellectual world of ancient Rome. She devoted herself to teaching scientific thinking and rational thought, which went against the established religious dogmas of the time. In the tragic year 415 AD, she fell victim to a brutal massacre by a mob of religious fanatics who saw her as a threat to their positions of power. The story of Hypatia highlights an important pattern that can be traced throughout human history. Intellectual progress is invariably met with fierce resistance. The fate of many prominent thinkers of the past is similar. They put forward ideas that were ahead of their time, for which they were rejected, ridiculed, and even punished. However, the paradox is that it was these innovative ideas, rejected during their author's lifetime, that later became the cornerstone of human progress. The fear felt by society is directed not so much at intelligence per se, but at the changes it brings with it. This raises a legitimate question. If historical experience shows that society resists profound thinkers, what action should you take if you are one of them? Is it really the lot of great minds to wander alone? Not at all. Rather, it is a call to engage consciously with the world. Not every person or environment is conducive to serious reflection. One should guard one's innermost thoughts and share them only with those who can appreciate them. There is no need to be understood by millions. Just find those who share your views. Finding like-minded people is a doable task. They can be found on the pages of books, in thematic online communities, in intellectual clubs. History knows many examples when the greatest thinkers found ways to communicate their profound ideas to the general public. Albert Einstein once remarked, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." It is important to learn how to express your thoughts in a way that does not scare others away with its complexity. Arthur Schopenhauer observed, "Talent strikes a target that no one else can strike. Genius strikes a target that no one else can see." People capable of deep analysis perceive the world differently, and this inevitably causes discomfort for some. However, this is no reason to give up on deep thinking. In today's world full of superficial judgments and fleeting opinions, the need for people capable of deep analysis and out-of-the-box thinking has never been greater. However, the paradox is that society is not always ready to accept those who dare to look beyond the horizon of the usual. If you have ever felt alienated by the depth of your thoughts, know that you are not alone. Human history is full of examples of geniuses whose ideas were ahead of their time and met with incomprehension and sometimes hostility from their contemporaries. But it was these visionaries, who were not afraid to go against the tide, who pushed progress forward, opening new horizons and changing the world for the better. If the ideas touched upon in this article resonate with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced rejection or misunderstanding because of your tendency to analyze deeply? Let's start an open and honest conversation about this important topic together. And if you're eager to broaden your horizons and hungry to learn about the ideas of the greatest minds in human history, join us and subscribe. This is just the beginning of our fascinating journey into a world of deep thoughts and inspiring discovery.